I'm excited to introduce you to someone who happens to be an internationally known speaker.
If you take a moment to look at your bios, please. I'm not going to spend much time introducing her because she's taking what tends to be a very comprehensive presentation and really condensing it down for us, and I'm very excited to have you hear what she has to present. So don't want to spend a lot of time going over her bio, but please do look up Dr. Rebecca Campbell. I'm very lucky that because she's right here in Michigan, we in Michigan get to work closely with Becky Campbell. And most recently, you've probably been reading about the research that she did on the 11,000 some shelved rape kits in Detroit. It's been very, very trend-setting in sexual assault all across the country. So please join me in welcoming and learning more about the neurobiology of sexual assault from Dr. Rebecca Campbell at Michigan State University.
Thank you, my dear. All right, let's see if the mic worked. It worked. We're good. Good morning, everyone. As Debbie said, my name is Rebecca Campbell. I'm a professor of psychology at Michigan State University, and I'm also a faculty member in the Research Consortium on Gender-Based Violence at MSU. So I am going to try to condense a lot of material today for you about the neurobiology of sexual assault. Okay? So in the time I have with you, we're going to talk about how the brain and the body responds to trauma in general, and then what we know from research happens specifically for sexual assault. And then I want to talk a little bit about some implications and some key take-home messages for all of you. The key goal in my presentation today is to share with you the science behind trauma. As I'm going through my presentation today, you're going to see little citations popping up in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. That is to peer-reviewed scientific research on this topic. It's not my opinion, it's not what I think. It's what the scientific community has been able to figure out about how trauma affects the brain and the body. And the reason why we need to know that here today at this summit is that for all of us who are working with sexual assault victims, and that means all of us, it's not just if you're a service provider, if you are family, if you are friends, any of us can be on the receiving end of a disclosure. Therefore, all of us do work with sexual assault survivors. And the more all of us know about how trauma affects them, we're going to be in a better place to give them the type of response that they deserve. So let's start off by talking a little bit about what we know from research on the neurobiology of sexual assault. So the way this kind of research works is that people like me and other researchers are hoping that survivors will come seek help, as we heard about today, that they would come to an emergency department for post-assault health care. And if they come to a health facility where a research study is being done, they might be asked if they're willing to participate in a research study. This is a huge ask. For every survivor who has ever said yes to me in a research protocol, I thank them. Because from them, we've been able to learn what happens in the brain and the body. We asked them if they might be willing to have an fMRI scan so we can see literally what parts of the brain light up, what parts of the brain shut down in a major trauma. We might take a blood sample to see what's happening in the brain and the body, what's the hormone levels in the blood. We might take a urine sample to see, again, how is the body responding to this trauma. So from the gifts that these survivors have given us to take a look inside, literally, what's happening, we've been able to learn how trauma affects the brain and the body, and that's what I want to share with you today. So our story begins here in the neurobiology of trauma with a little structure in your brain called the amygdala. It's about 1 inch long, it's almond shaped. It's that blue dot that you see there on the screen. Now what your amygdala does is it helps you process emotional reactions and memories in response to threats to your survival. Let me put it a little bit more simply. Here's what your amygdala does. It is constantly scanning your environment for things that might kill you. And when it recognizes one of those things, it fires off. And it's going to help you emotionally and behaviorally process this experience, because if you're in a life-threatening situation, you need to be able to keep your wits about you, keep your emotions under control as best you can to get through it. And we need to lay down a memory of the trauma. From an evolutionary standpoint, when we're experiencing a life-threatening situation, we need to remember it so that we can communicate to others. That thing there, that's a threat to us. We need to do something about it. So we are hardwired in a major trauma to try to help with the emotional behavioral loop and with the memory pieces of a major trauma. So that's what I want to share with you now, take you down each of these loops in the brain and the body. So on the emotional loop, if you're experiencing a major trauma like sexual assault, here's what's happening in the brain and the body. The amygdala recognizes the threat. It sends a signal to a structure in your brain called the hypothalamus. There's no test later. Don't worry, you don't have to write this all down. And then from the hypothalamus, a signal to the pituitary gland. Now, your pituitary gland is the master gland that controls all the glands throughout your body. This loop is called the HPA axis, and this probably is an acronym you do want to remember. So in major traumas like sexual assault, the brain-body response is to turn on the HPA axis. Hypothalamus, pituitary to the A, adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands are right here. They sit down on top of your kidneys. So the distress signal to your adrenals is help, help. I am in a life-threatening situation, help. The way your adrenals respond to that signal is to pump out some hormones for you. For major traumas like sexual assault, some combination of these 4 hormones are secreted by the adrenals. First, catecholamines, adrenaline, fight or flight. If you're in a life-threatening situation, our bodies often, not always, but often respond with a big burst of adrenaline to help us be able to fight back against the threat or to flee, to run away from it. Now, this second hormone, called cortisol, is an interesting little thing, okay? It's sometimes called an energy hormone. It affects how much energy you have to be able to execute something like fight or flight. Well, sometimes in major traumas like sexual assault, the cortisol and the catecholamines don't always quite sync up right. So actually, the neurobiological response to any major trauma is fight, flight, or freeze. We are all wired for this possibility. In any major trauma, like a sexual assault, our body's neurobiological response may be to fight, it may be to flight, to flee, it may be to freeze. It's actually a very common response, particularly for sexual assault. The body freezes, okay? It's not something somebody decides. It's not something that we think up here and go, well, I guess in this situation I ought to fight, flight. No. It's your adrenals. Your body decides for you. It is a neurobiological response. Depending upon what comes out of your adrenals, you can get fight, flight, or freeze, okay? So when we hear from survivors that they had one of those 3 responses, it's not fair for us to judge them because they didn't pick it. Their body picked it. Their body made a decision, so to speak, through the adrenal glands, through the hormones. What was the best way to try to keep this person alive? Now, these other 2 hormones that come out in a major trauma help us manage the pain of trauma. Sexual assault, other major traumas cause physical pain. They cause tremendous emotional pain. So thankfully, our bodies are hardwired to give us a little bit of help there too. So one of the hormones that we see a lot in the blood samples of sexual assault survivors are opioids. Pain relief, morphine. You get a natural burst of pain relief in the assault and in the immediate aftermath. So what that does, like all opioids, like all narcotics, is it blunts the pain, but it blunts everything. So what happens is the victim's emotional and behavioral response is very flat. They can describe horrible things that have happened to them with no emotion whatsoever. And again, that can be very puzzling. People can judge them for it because they're not acting right. They're acting fine. They're acting completely consistent with what we know about the neurobiology of trauma. That incredibly flat, blunted emotional response is entirely explained by the opioid release. We might expect a hot mess and crying and sobbing, and then we see a very controlled, emotionally restrained response. That's a completely typical response to major trauma because of the opioid release. Now, this last hormone up here is called oxytocin. This is an interesting one, too. This is a hormone that promotes positive feelings, bonding feelings. It's actually secreted when a mother nurses her child. So why would that be secreted in a major trauma like sexual assault? Well, the body's trying to block pain, okay? Two main ways you can block pain. One is to push down the pain, the bad stuff. That's what the opioids do. The other way to block pain is to counterbalance it by pushing up the good feelings. That's what the oxytocin does. It's a way of managing the pain by counterbalancing against the bad stuff by pushing up the good stuff. So for victims who have a very high oxytocin release in a major trauma like sexual assault, their emotional and behavioral presentation is going to be also different than what we might expect, because they might be laughing, they might be giggling, they might be smiling, they might be talking about the person who just harmed them in these incredibly loving ways, and we're like, whoa, that's strange. No, it's not. No, it's not. Take it back to the biology. Depending upon what the oxytocin releases, that would be a completely reasonable and expected and predicted response to trauma. Again, as society, we might judge it, not a fair judgment. It's a neurobiological response to trauma. It's the way the brain and the body are trying to balance the pain, push down the bad, counterbalance against the good. Okay? So, for sexual assault specifically, what is happening in the brain and the body then, from that basic introduction? Well, in a sexual assault, the amygdala fires off. Okay, what did I say the amygdala does? It's the structure in your brain that's scanning, looking for things that might kill you. That means that the brain interprets sexual assault as a threat to the survival to the organism. Okay? Stranger assaults, dragged off the street, yes, the amygdala fires off. 2 drunk college kids in a dorm room, fires off. Society puts labels on this and hierarchically arranges them. Nope, the brain doesn't, the body doesn't. It's all rape to the brain. The victim-offender relationship, the context, the social setting, the physical location doesn't matter. It is an invasive crime against the body. It is threatening potentially the survival of the organism. The amygdala fires off. So for a sexual assault, the amygdala fires off. It sends the message to the hypothalamus. The HPA axis is activated, and it is a flood. The hormonal release after a sexual assault is very strong. It is a very scary, neurobiologically scary thing to go through. So some combination of those 4 hormones I just described to you will be secreted by the victim's adrenal glands. And again, depending upon which hormones, in which combinations, we can see all kinds of different responses. If the adrenaline release is very high, we would expect them to be very jacked up, but perhaps not very logical, perhaps not in the place to be able to think through in logical sequence, because guess what? We can't do that in the midst of an adrenaline rush. It just doesn't work. Literally, the circuits in our brain that do that kind of calm, rational decision-making are flooded, okay? So for sexual assault survivors who have a strong adrenaline release, a strong catecholamine release, we would expect them not to be able to sort of logically think through, oh, I ought to do this, and they're just going to be kind of like, duh, okay? Totally normal response. For victims who also have a strong catecholamine release, they're going to be very hyper and very jangled, because that's what adrenaline does to the body. It makes you pretty hyper and pretty jangly. Okay? For those who have a very high opioid release, we would expect to see that very flat, emotionless presentation where they're not crying, they're not showing visible signs of distress. There's plenty of signs of distress, so much so that the body had to tamp it down with natural morphine. And again, if the oxytocin release is high, we would expect to see that sort of laughing, giggling type of response. Now, here's the other thing to keep in mind from the neurobiological response to sexual assault. Any and all of these are possible, and you can see all of them in the very short time span. They can be up, they can be down, they can be up, they can be down, they can be laughing, they can be flat, they can be freeze, they can go in and out of this, all of these different responses very quickly and over time. There's no one way to do this. There's no one way the body responds. It depends which hormones, which concentrations, how it all comes together in the bloodstream. Okay? Sometimes, as we've talked about, though, the response neurobiologically is so strong, so extreme, the body just shuts down. This is very common for sexual assault survivors, and it's called tonic immobility. This is also a name worth remembering today. Tonic immobility in the context of rape is called rape-induced paralysis. It is an autonomic response. It means it is hardwired into us. It is a mammalian response to a very threatening situation. What it means behaviorally is that a victim can't move. He or she is, well, paralyzed, which means they can't move their legs, they can't move their arms, they can't push back. Sometimes, depending upon the nature of the paralysis, they can't talk, because this is muscles. It takes muscles to speak. And depending upon the paralysis, they might not even be able to say no. They may not be able to do anything. It is a neurobiological response to extreme trauma. We know between 12 to 50% of rape victims experience tonic immobility. Once researchers got a little bit better about asking about this and asking about it well, it became clear that the percentage is probably closer to that 50% rather than the 12%. So we should be assuming that a little less than half of the rape victims we're working with are going to experience tonic immobility. It could be a few seconds, it could be a few minutes, it could go on for a couple of hours. From the survivor's point of view, this is terrifying. This is a quote from an interview I did with a survivor in a research project where she experienced tonic immobility. She said, "I was terrified. I couldn't do anything, and I didn't know why. I didn't want to tell no one because what would I be able to say? No, I didn't fight back. No, I didn't yell for help. I just laid there, wondering if I was going to die." Look at that. No, I didn't fight back. No, I didn't yell for help. I just laid there. She's failed our tests. She's failed the tests of society. What do we expect victims to do? Fight back, say no, yell for help, do something to protect themselves. She couldn't do that. She failed our tests. She didn't fail anything. She didn't seek help that might have been very instrumental to her recovery, because she didn't understand her response, and she felt like the collective we were going to judge her for it. There's a simple explanation for what she experienced. It's tonic immobility. It's a neurobiological condition that happens in extreme traumatic situations like sexual assault. This would have been very straightforward to explain in a court of law. I've done it many times. So for those of us working with sexual assault victims, we need to know and have this name, tonic immobility. It's one of the greatest gifts sometimes we can give survivors, is a name for what they've experienced, and to let them know it wasn't their fault that they responded this way. It's a neurobiological condition. It's actually a sign of trauma. All right, let's pick up the memory loop now. I said that we need to be able to remember major traumas. We're hardwired to remember traumas. So here our amygdala, again, the structure trying to keep us alive, signals to our hippocampus. Your hippocampus is your memory maker. It takes information that you're receiving all throughout your day and turning it into memories, okay? This is how memory normally works. You go through your day, you get information. So the little pixels now are colored with a little bit of red, blue. It reflects the different sensory information. Your visual, your auditory, your tactile, all of that's coming into your brain, okay? So your brain then has to organize it, because it's just kind of a jumbled mess as it comes in. So it organizes it, and then it chunks it. And it makes memories. So it takes all of the things that pertain to a particular event, groups them together, essentially labels it, puts it in your head. This is my memory of the summit, okay? Because that's what's happening right now in all of your hippocampuses, campi, I don't know what the plural is. Keep meaning to look that up, and I keep forgetting. Okay, so right now your brain is consolidating all this sensory information, putting it in a nice, neat chunk, memory, labeling it in your brain, the summit on campus sexual assault. Here's the thing, though. Trauma hormones, those 4 that I just described to you, they interfere with the consolidation part of memory. So it doesn't come together in a nice, neat, coherent chunk. It's scattered. Visual artist representation of what a traumatic memory looks like. It is scattered. It does not come together in a nice, neat package where you can pull it up and say, well, this is my memory of this, and we started this, and we did this, and we did this, and we did... No. That's not how trauma memories are laid down in the brain. The hormones that are come out of the adrenals cause consolidation to be scattered. So the memories are a little bit here, kind of in chunks, sometimes random, certainly not linear. So during a sexual assault, and specifically, what's happening is those memories, as they're trying to be laid down in the brain, don't get put together in a nice, neat package. They get incredibly fragmented, and they're stored kind of here, there, and everywhere. So that means when a victim is trying to remember and describe a sexual assault, he or she is going to have a little bit of difficulty doing it. Let me do a really quick demonstration for you. Let's say that you're trying to take notes on this particular presentation, and all you have to work with is a Post-it note. Okay? Like this. For those of you in the back, this is the small size of Post-it notes, okay? So let's say you're trying to take notes on my presentation, Casey's, everyone's presentations today using little Post-it notes. Okay, well, you don't get a whole lot written down on one Post-it note, right, before you have to peel it off and stick it onto another one. And sometimes if you get a little tiny Post-it note, you can only get a few words written down. If you get a larger Post-it note, you can write a little bit more down. Maybe you're really lucky and you've got the big Post-it notes. Yes, the line tablet Post-it notes. These are not standard issue at my university. Hint, hint, hint. All right. So if you were trying to take notes on a presentation like this and you had all these different Post-it notes, it would be kind of a jumbled mess at the end, right? Some are on pink, some are blue, some Post-it notes have a single word, some get a nice long paragraph with lots of details, okay? I told you that memory is scattered, okay? So the Post-it notes actually don't get to come together in a nice, neat thing. They're scattered every which way. Totally scattered all over the stage, all over the brain. Now, 24 hours from now, let's say you have to come back and you have to tell me what I said in my presentation. You're going to be like, where'd my Post-it notes go? And you're going to try to remember it, and you're going to throw out some words, amygdala. There's the hippocampus, and you're going to do the best you can to try to remember what I just told you, but you're probably like, man, I really wish I could find those Post-it notes because they're disorganized. If you could find the Post-it notes, you'd probably be able to tell me what I said. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of winging it, okay? Now, let's say you're trying to tell me what I said in this presentation, and you don't have your Post-it notes, and I'm not going to give you a chance to do your Post-it notes, and as you talk, I interrupt you. And you're like, well, the hippocampus, and I'm like, Mary, was it the hippocampus or the hypothalamus? And you're like, I don't know. They both start with H. Right? And I'm like, don't you remember, Mary? Was it the hippocampus? I know Mary for many years, so don't worry. I'm picking on her on purpose, okay? And she'd be like, when she can't answer me just like that, and I ask her another question and another question and another question, and I fold my arms across my chest, and I tilt my head to the side, and I lean back, and I give her all the nonverbals, because she can't tell me exactly what I said in the exact order, I might say to something like, well, you were there, weren't you? How do you not know? You were there, weren't you? This is how sexual assault victims are treated by society. This is how they're interviewed more often than not by law enforcement, by prosecutors, by doctors, nurses, by us as a society. We expect them to have this picture-perfect representation of their trauma. It's not realistic. It's not possible. It is Post-it notes scattered all over their head. They need a few minutes to try to find their notes and put them together. This is a quote from an interview of a rape survivor about her experience being interviewed by law enforcement. She said, he wouldn't let up, pounding me with question after question after question, trying to trick me, trying to get me to mess up. I wanted to say, hold on, give me a minute to think. No, he kept coming at me. She was so distressed in this research interview that when I sent it out for transcription, my transcriptionist sent it back to me and she said, Dr. Campbell, I need you to look at these lines because I'm not sure I transcribed it correctly. Is she talking about the rapist or the detective? She's talking about the detective. She is standing before all of her Post-it notes saying, just let me find them and put them in order. And he kept coming at her, question after question after question. She can't find it. She can't retrieve it. She certainly doesn't want to. So we have to change the way we work with survivors given what we know about trauma and how the memory works. So, some key take-home lessons from our brief introduction today to the neurobiology of trauma. From that emotional behavioral loop, that HPA axis, remember I said that one was worth remembering, that stays jacked up for 96 hours after an assault. 4 days. And it reactivates whenever the memory is triggered. We heard very poignant stories this morning about the triggers, the gym, the dorm, seeing the rapist on campus. Every time it is triggered, the HPA axis turns back on. So those hormones start coursing through the body again. And guess what they do? They do a lot of difficult things. They cause that flat affect, the so-called strange emotions, the huge emotional swings. It can make survivors irritable and argumentative because that's what adrenaline does when it stays in your bloodstream way past its welcome. It starts to take a physical toll on victims. Headaches, insomnia, gastrointestinal distress. One of the key long-term health consequences of sexual assault is ulcers. Ulcers and other gastrointestinal problems. And it starts to cause an increase in drug and alcohol because of self-medicating behaviors. Because the longer the HPA axis stays on and jacked up, the worse you feel. It's not meant to click on and stay on. It's meant to come on, help you through a bad situation, shut off, and go down. But for sexual assault, it doesn't go down. Too many triggers, too many reminders, too many everythings. It stays up. And it physically wears and tears on the body. Drinking drugs, drinking alcohol, taking drugs will provide symptomatic relief. To be clear, I am not advocating for that. I'm saying this is how substance abuse problems develop. It's a self-medicating behavior. It is survivors trying to take some control back and trying to get some relief from the way their bodies are responding to the trauma. So when we work with survivors, sometimes that's the first sign we have that they are a survivor, is the increased alcohol and drug use. So there are neurobiological reasons why victims behave the way they do. We have an obligation to know the science behind it, to understand that these reactions are part of what it means to survive trauma. Let's talk a little bit finally about some take-homes from this. Okay? We have to get the HPA axis turned down. It's not helping us. Once it's on, it makes those hormones, it makes everything very difficult. How do you turn it off? It's simple. We need to provide caring, emotional support. It's very straightforward. How do you do that? Be kind, be human, be respectful, give victims information and time to make decisions. What do we ask victims to do in those first 4 days? Get an exam, make a decision about this. Whoa, what's happening in those first 4 days? The HPA axis is still kicked on. It's very difficult to process complex information in that neurobiological trauma response. We need to give victims time to make decisions. The more we force a decision right away, guess what the decision's going to be? No. And it's a very protective choice. We need to connect victims to advocacy and support services by name, not an acronym. Okay, we all have acronyms at our universities, SASB, SOCSI, SISB, we do, okay? I can joke because I've been in those places, okay? People don't seek help from acronyms. They seek help from people. Who are the people in your neighborhood? In your neighborhood. You need to know the people in your neighborhood, and we need to be making referrals by name. It's not go see SASB, SACSI, whatever. Go see Mary. Go see Debbie. Go see John. These are the people who can help you. We need to change the communication out so we're not saying go seek help from an acronym. Go seek help from a person. Okay? Couple take home on the memory pieces. I told you that the trauma hormones fragment the memories. It's here, there, and everywhere. It's not lost. It's there. We have to be smart about working with survivors to pull the memory back out. Because the content is fine. It's just scattered. There's no evidence to suggest that there's damage to the memory and its content. The damage is in the organization. So we have to work with survivors in a reasonable way to try to help them get the memories out. So don't make victims tell their stories over and over again. When I'm asked to look at protocols for campus sexual assault and I see that the victim has to tell the story here and here and here and here and here, guess what? That's not neurologically reasonable. That's not best practice. Far from it. All you're doing is scattering it worse and worse and worse and worse. You're driving the HPA axis up when we're trying to drive it down. We need to be thoughtful about how and when we do our interviews. We also want to try to give survivors a chance to sleep before they have to do any kind of intensive interview. Why? Sleep consolidates memory. So the fragmentation isn't going to be as severe if we let them go sleep. You'll get a better interview 1 to 2 sleep cycles after a major trauma than if you make someone do it right here and right now. We're all worried it's going to go away. It doesn't go away. It will consolidate better. So we need to have patience. Remember the Post-it note analogy. They're standing there trying to find their Post-it notes. All we need to do is very simple. Shut up and let them find their Post-it notes. It's really very simple, okay? And when we are doing more intensive interviewing, we need to be using trauma-informed interviewing methods. That's a subject for a whole other conference, a whole other training. I encourage all of you who are frontline responders to take the next step to get trained in trauma-informed interviewing methods, to learn more about how memory and trauma work so that you can use that science to be able to get in, work with survivors collaboratively and kindly to be able to recall the assault better. So I hope that today's presentation that I've been able to give you gives you a little bit of insight into the underlying science of trauma, the hows and the whys, the neurobiological reasons why victims behave the way they do. Because I think this information can be very helpful to us in creating a victim-centered and trauma-informed response to college sexual assault. Before I go, I want to share with you one final quote. When I do my interviews with survivors in my research projects, the last question I ask them is, what do you want me to tell people when I'm out, when I'm doing trainings, when I'm doing public speaking? What message do you want me to take forward? This is what one survivor said, and it beautifully captured what I hear from so many of them. She said, tell them this. Everything you say, everything you do is a chance to help me or hurt me. Make the choice to help. Please help me. Every interaction matters. Every interaction is a choice for us to help or to hurt. Let's all make the choice to help. So I thank you for your time. This is how you find me, how you can get an extensive webinar and training on these topics. Thank you very much.
Great job. Thank you so much, Becky. I know that one of the First Lady's goals was that this day be transformative, and I think the information that you just heard from Dr. Campbell is exactly the kind of transformative information we were looking for, that gives us concrete information about how we can handle situations with survivors differently. So thank you for that. Before I introduce our next national speaker, I'd like to remind you of a couple of different things. When we finish with this speaker, we're going to go straight to our workshops or breakout sessions. So I'd like to remind you that there will be 3 of those. One on incorporating technology in room 103-104, which is on the first floor. Living on Campus, student and staff discussion, which will be in the governor's room on the 2nd floor, and bystander intervention techniques, which will be in rooms 201 and 202 on the 2nd floor. When we finish that, we'll be coming here, I believe in this room, is that correct? And that will be for lunch, and a keynote address. So we'll be going directly after this presenter to the breakout sessions and then lunch at noon. So with that in mind, I'm delighted to introduce you to our next presenter, who's someone that I've been pleased to know and watch from afar, from a terrific organization, national organization called Futures Without Violence. And this presenter, Casey Corcoran, is the program director at Futures Without Violence, and he will be talking about some of the national best practice work that they're doing on a comprehensive response to gender-based violence. For more than 30 years, Futures has been providing groundbreaking programs, policies, and campaigns to empower individuals and organizations to end violence against women. Casey's current work focuses on development of a national training institute to help colleges and universities create comprehensive responses to sexual violence on their campuses. So please join me in a warm welcome to Casey. Thank you.
Good morning. See, I also used to be a elementary school teacher as well, so it's still in my blood. You know, you never stop being a teacher. I am so excited to be here, and I'm looking for a place for my water. I am so excited to be here. This is really an amazing gathering. It's pretty intimidating having 450 of you in front of me here. It's a nice, intimate gathering. This is such critical work, and I'm going to spend some time talking about national best practices and how we create a comprehensive response to gender-based violence and sexual violence on campus. I'm also really excited that Michigan is taking a lead on this. I've had the good fortune of working with any number of national experts from the state of Michigan. It's really a hotbed for expertise in this work. You have such incredible resources. So I'm so appreciative to be with you and all the other folks in this room who have come to talk about this critical topic. And I think Michigan can, as the First Lady said, be a national leader, be a state that takes the lead in this and is a model for other states. So I'm truly grateful that you're taking on, not just at the campus level, not just at the county level, but the state level, and saying, as a state, this is critical. It's critical that we address this. I also want to start off with a nod. Again, we started in the beginning to the students in the room. If you could just show me where you are again. If the students could stand up for me again. I know, it's embarrassing, right? So we owe you, thank you, we owe you, we are in debt to the work that so many students have done to push this issue front and center over the past few years, truly. As somebody who's been working in the field for getting close to 20 years, it's been incredible to see the movement, and it has been so critical, and it has been in large part by the students who have pushed it front and center. So I come from an organization called Futures Without Violence. We're based in San Francisco. I'm out of our Boston office. We're an organization that has been working on the issue of gender-based violence and sexual assault for over 30 years. Our founder, Esta Solar, was one of the prime movers on the passage of the Violence Against Women Act when she was then working with then Vice President Biden. We're an organization that does work in the college campuses, but also an organization that recognizes that sexual assault and sexual violence is not bracketed by the 4 years of college, right? This is an issue that young people, children and young people, are experiencing before they get on campus, and it's one they're experiencing in profound levels when they leave campus. So the work you're doing and the work that we're talking about here today sits in that context of the national and global work that we are doing to end gender-based violence and sexual violence. So the issue at hand, it's kind of the how did we get here slide. So while Futures and many people in the room have been working on this issue for any number of years, for entire careers, we really saw an uptick nationally in folks paying attention to this issue after a young woman at Amherst College came forward to talk about her experience. And her name is Angie Epifano, and I hope if people haven't heard her story, I hope people will go and look it up and learn more about her. And what was so incredible is she wrote a lengthy piece in their student newspaper where she came forward and said, this is what happened to me on campus. And that experience was awful. That rape was awful. But she also talked about, as Dr. Campbell talked about, as the young people who spoke, our brave survivors who came forward and spoke, it was the response of the school that made it so much worse. And she came forward and laid it out and captured people's attention. And it started an avalanche of activism and pushed that activism into the forefront of people's minds. And I say this because I'm married to a researcher, a public health researcher. I love data. I love statistics. Statistics are critical. Data are critical. It informs the work we do, but stories matter, and we need to make space to listen to those stories. So, so I really want to thank Emma and Lauren for sharing your story, because that's what grounds us in this work. That's what grounds me in this work, and that's what grounds our organization in this work as well. So we know that this is a huge problem. we have the research, we have the data. We could always use more. We know that 1 in 5 women in the U.S. has been raped at some time in their lives, and that half report being raped by an intimate partner. Again, important to call out, because when we're talking about sexual assault, we know that it is most often not that person in the woods, in the bushes hiding, that's going to jump out. It's often someone a young person knows, and it's often an intimate partner, a relationship that someone's in. We know that most of those women, in particular women, who are raped are not going to come forward and report that rape. Incredibly low numbers. We know that there are still a lot of colleges across the country that are not reporting any sexual assaults on campus. In a recent study that came out of Brown University in Rhode Island, and it was done at a school I believe in New York, 37% of the women surveyed said that they were a victim of rape or an attempted rape sometime between the ages of 14 and their sophomore year of college. I mean, what that tells us that we have a large number of women who are coming to college and leaving college having experienced sexual assault, whether it was actually on the campus or it was before. So when we think about our responses, when we think about how we work with survivors, we have to acknowledge that many of them are survivors before they even walk on our campuses. And we have to be able to address that. I also want to call out that the bulk of the statistics we have, and this is with good reason, and people may notice this, are about women, right? So what about men? We know that men are victims of sexual assault as well. We know that. We have good data. We also know that the majority of sexual assaults perpetrated are by men, and we need to call that out. We also know that the majority of men are not perpetrating sexual assaults. We need to call that out. We can't ignore that. It is imperative. We have a guy problem that we have to address. We have to get to our young, I say this as a man, we have to get to our young men early, not in college, but before that. We need to talk about this, and we need to call out those men and those boys and those young men who are taking active leadership in ending gender-based violence and sexual violence, because there are a lot of great guys out there doing this work with us. We need to call them out as well, but we can't ignore the fact that we have a guy problem that we have to address. So, a comprehensive response. Sounds easy, right? Easy. We'll put it on a slide. And I have all the answers. It only takes 20 minutes. We don't have all the answers, but that's part of the point. And what I'm not going to talk about, I'm not going to give you a list of programs that you can go back to your schools and implement, because there are wonderful organizations in your state. There are wonderful national resources. There's an incredible evidence base that you can look to learn about those programs. What I want to spend some time talking about is not necessarily the activities that you'll do, but how we think about a comprehensive response. What is the spirit that we're bringing to addressing this program on campuses? And there's a model. I'm a public health guy and come from a public health family. There's a model that I like to use and that really shapes my thinking and our organizational thinking. And it's called the social ecological model. And this is a model, oftentimes when we're thinking about interventions or programs, we think about it at the individual level, working with that survivor, working with that alleged perpetrator. But what the social ecological model challenges us to do is to recognize that those individuals don't exist as standalones. It's not just an individual standing over there, survivor. Individuals exist within a context, and the social ecological model provides us a context. It says that individuals exist within communities. They exist within friend groups, within social networks. They exist within organizations. And they exist within policies that can have a really profound effect on them, whether it be campus policy, state policy, or national policy. And this model takes that context into consideration. And at every level of the program, at every level of this model, we need to make sure that we hold on to some key understandings in a comprehensive response. We have to make sure that any response we have is grounded in the best research that we have experts like Dr. Campbell who we can call on to tell us about what's going on and what we need to know about trauma. We need to be informed by the practice and experience of people in the field like yourself who are doing the work on the ground. We need to make sure that it's community informed so that we're not doing to, but we're doing with. We're doing it in collaboration. We're not just dropping a program in somebody else's community. And we need to make sure that it's culturally relevant. We have, it's close to 2,500 institutions of higher education across the country. They are very different, each of them. There are many similarities, but they're also very different. So we need to make sure that we hold these pieces when we think about developing and implementing comprehensive responses. A number of years ago, I had a colleague at the CDC who said to me something that's really struck with me about really, it applies to any issue, and that's doing something isn't always better than doing nothing. Because sometimes when you do something, no matter how well-intentioned it is, it can do more harm. All right? So we have to think critically about what our responses are. So in the 30-some-odd years at Futures of thinking about this and doing movement building, we've come up with a few keys for comprehensive response. It may seem like a short list, but there's lots of things that go under it. One is that we need to keep the pressure on in any movement, and we are in the middle of a movement, and we need to recognize that. In any movement, we need to keep the pressure on, and we need to keep the pressure on at all the different levels of the social ecology. And we also need to develop and disseminate best practice and promising practices. And that sounds easier than it is when we think about the diversity of campuses, when we think about how large a country this is, and we think about how many schools may not be at the table at any given convening. We need to do these two things, keep the pressure on and develop and disseminate best practices. So now I'm going to talk about some programs that we've done at Futures and that some of our partners have done to help keep the pressure on. And at the different levels. So this was from a summit that we did at Harvard University in partnership with the Harvard School of Law called Speak Up to Take Rape Culture Down. It was an amazing conference, and this was working at the individual level and the interpersonal level, which is critical. We still need to be working with people on the ground. We brought together, this convening had 250 students from over 50 colleges and universities in New England, brought together for a full day to learn knowledge, to learn skills, and to have an opportunity to practice those skills. And I would say one of the most amazing things is I assume people here have been to lots of conferences in the past. All right? So I'm not saying I've ever done this, but at a lot of conferences after lunch, people skip their breakout sessions, right? Oh, you have some work to do. People don't attend everything. This was a summit that we did where more students kept coming as it went on, so the room kept getting fuller and fuller. And by the end, we had more people than we started with, and an hour and a half after the summit was over, a bulk of those students were still there talking. All right? We need to engage students at the individual level. We need to not just talk to them, we need to give them opportunities to talk to each other. We need to give them opportunities to organize, because they are making incredible change. We've also done a lot of work at the organizational level, one of the next levels on the social ecology. We created a guideline called Beyond Title IX, which is, there was an experts gathering that came up with some of the key concepts, some of the key measures, some of the key programs and ways of thinking for schools. It was a start. We also developed a card that can be given out at health centers called our Who's Got Your Back card. It can be given out. It talks about sexual violence and the prevalence, online tools that can be used, and also positive bystander work, which we like to call positive upstander work. I also want to call out a partner, Peter Novak at the University of San Francisco, and some people may have seen some of his work. They developed an online module, a three-piece module really, that before a freshman comes onto campus, they have to take this three-part online module. But that online module isn't a standalone, and it talks about sexual violence and healthy relationships and alcohol. That's not a standalone, because that's the think about it piece before they get to campus. It's the talk about it piece, which is when they get into campus, they have a series of workshops that they go to and trainings that they attend. And I want to point out, not just for freshman year, not just when they first get onto campus, because those are the newest members of the community. They don't always have the most pull on campus as students. We need to work across the years, which is what they do, and then do something about it. They have a bystander approach. Active bystander. If you see something, say something, do something, stand up. And they're attempting to create programming that goes across that social ecological model that I put out. They're also being bold. And hosting a statewide conference like this is being bold. This is being bold, saying, this is a state issue. We're taking this on. We're gathering 450 of our best friends in this room, and we're going to have some hard conversations, and we're going to do some critical thinking about this issue. We need to be bold. And we need the leadership like we have here. And we have I want to go back to the summit that we hosted for a minute. I was so excited to see how many school and university leaders were in the room today. We hosted that summit at Harvard, and we invited any number of college presidents and senior, Rebecca knows where I'm going with this, and senior leadership to join us. We had one college president join us. How many schools we had represented? How many students paid their own way there and took time out? We had one college president, and I want to name her. It's Helen Drinan, Dr. Helen Drinan from Simmons College in Boston. And Dr. President Drinan got up on stage and apologized on behalf of her colleagues that they were not there. She said, "I'm embarrassed. This is hard that I'm the only one here," saying this on somebody else's campus. So the leadership here is impactful, it's bold, it's showing a commitment. So the University of San Francisco is the first to adopt a program, folks may know this, it's pretty new, called Callisto. Callisto is a program that survivors of sexual assault and sexual violence can report their assault anonymously. And what it does is, it timestamps it, and it doesn't automatically put it into the system. So if a survivor does not want it to go into the system, they want to do it anonymously, they can get their report out and have it stop there. It also has a mechanism where if two people file a report about the same person, that it automatically kicks it, creates a report, and makes it public. And of course, people have to agree with it, and you can opt in or opt out at any time. It's a survivor-centered approach to reporting. They're being bold and they're being innovative in adopting this reporting mechanism, because we saw that slide earlier, right? How 88% don't report? We have to change that. We can't keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, right? That's the definition of crazy. We have to think outside the box, and we have to be a little bold on this, and we have to take risks. And these were risks that survivors were willing to take. They've endorsed this system. We also, in thinking outside the box a little bit and getting people's attention, which is critically important, because keeping the pressure on, the media's paying attention now, we need to keep the pressure on. We need to keep people paying attention. So I'm gonna float, and this is really for the students in the room. I'm gonna float a little campaign that we were recently in Virginia, which I'm gonna talk about. I'm gonna float a little campaign that we were thinking about. And you can give me your opinion at lunch. And you can tell me if you like it or you hate it. You know, just be like, Casey, don't do it, man. It's not good, not good. All right? We talk a lot about school climate and the need to change school climate, make it positive. It says it all, right? I support climate change. Right? So, now, of course, the back of the shirt says something like this. Right? But we want to get people's attention, and we want to be funny, and we want to be interesting. And when we told this to students at the University of Virginia, they all said, "Oh my God, I would wear that shirt." Because people can believe in climate change or not believe it, but nobody supports it. So if you said, "Wear your shirt proud," I support climate change. Proud to support climate change. Put it on your Facebook picture. I support climate change. People will ask you what it is, and then you'll have a conversation about the issue. Right? You'll bring people in that might not have been talking about it beforehand. We also developed a program called the Other Freshman 15, which, if folks know, the original Freshman 15, which is, actually it's a myth. It's not 15 pounds that the average freshman puts on. For some, me, it might have been a little more. It's usually about 2.5 pounds. But we started a campaign called the Other Freshman 15, where we created an online tool where parents, alums, in students could email their college and university presidents to say, this is an issue that I care about, this is an issue that I'm paying attention to, and this is an issue that I want to know what you're doing, and I want to be part of the solution. It encouraged folks to connect at that higher level and to push their schools for change. Some folks here may have gotten some of those emails. And I would have to say, the vast majority of the emails we got from college presidents were amazing. But quite honestly, we did get some letters back that said, don't bother me with this. Students did. We've also been working with the filmmakers of The Hunting Ground, which is a whole different level of the model, where it's awareness raising, where it's lifting up the carpet and looking under it, shining the light on this. And we talk about those statistics in those schools that are not reporting, are reporting no sexual assaults. We know that's not the case. We need to lift the carpet up on this issue, and we need to better understand and be transparent about data. Data are our friend. And as we know, a higher reporting of campus sexual assault does not mean that a school is necessarily doing a poor job. Many times that will indicate that a school is actually doing good surveillance around the issue. And we need to encourage schools and not penalize them or vilify them when we do have those numbers, because a school that has high numbers but has really good prevention and intervention and response programming, they may be doing exactly the right thing, and they may be that model that we want to look to. So films like The Hunting Ground, and there are other documentaries are out that are bringing it to a wider audience. That film is going to be shown, now it's on campuses, it was in the theater for a while, that's going to be on CNN come October 9th, all right? A lot of people are going to see it. A lot of people are going to be aware of this issue when that film reaches a broader audience. We also have to think about policy. Policy is so critical, and we have policymakers in the room. The college university level policy, the state level policy, and the federal policy. And just like the programming that we do, these policies aren't standalone. They interact with each other. They talk with each other, sometimes in good ways and sometimes in really challenging ways. But we need to make sure we're integrating our policy response, and we're making sure that that young person that is on that campus, that is in that program, that is in that major, is supported by the policies on the campus, in the state, and at the federal level with Title IX. So campus sexual... I didn't click through. So now we're going to move how we've been thinking about and how we identify best practices. And this is the first time we're sharing this, or I'm sharing this, but really we haven't shared it organizationally to a broad audience yet. And that is, we're developing a campus sexual assault institute. And I promise it will have a snappier name. Once we're finalized, we're just in the beginning phases. But we started this institute, the development of this institute, with generous funding from Avon Foundation for Women and partnerships with Harvard Law, the Jefferson Trust. We started this because we were hearing from schools and we were hearing from advocates who are working with schools that they wanted more than a website. They wanted more than resources that were passed on a listserv. Those were important, but they wanted more. So this is modeled after our successful Judicial Institute, Human Trafficking Institute, and Fatherhood Institute that we've had for many years and are now funded by the federal government. And what it is bringing together multidisciplinary teams to be trained up in best practices. Again, not necessarily the best programs. We'll get there. But the best practices in how we create a comprehensive approach to the issue of gender-based and sexual violence on campus. So, nary a week and a half ago, we gathered, anybody know where this is? This is a test. University of Virginia. We gathered at the University of Virginia. There were about 35 of us. I don't know if some people had read, but the University of Virginia received a little bit of press about some sexual assault and sexual violence stuff that happened there. Do people remember that? Yes, right, the Rolling Stone article. So this, what an appropriate place to be doing this work, and what courage and leadership President Sullivan took at the University of Virginia, because when we approached her about being a partnership on this institute, it was right after the retraction had come out from Rolling Stone. And she had an opportunity to say, I think we're set right now. We're gonna stay out of the limelight a little bit on this. But what she said to us and what she said publicly to the media was, no, this is still a huge problem on our campus. And the University of Virginia needs to be a national leader on this. We are not going to let this story push aside the real issue of sexual violence and sexual assault on campus. So they've taken the lead. We gathered at their university. We rolled up our sleeves. You can see I picked a picture where I actually rolled up my sleeves, right? Huh? I know I shouldn't. So we rolled up our sleeves, right? So we had some of the best and brightest, including Gina, one of our keynotes, who's here with us, in the room, and we had 2 hard, grueling days of work. We put folks to work. And the folks we had at the table came from all over the place. We had senior administrators, we had presidents from community colleges, students, Title IX coordinators, school safety, legal advocates, faculty, policy, and we also had athletics in the room, and we had fraternities, the president and executive director of a national fraternity organization in the room. These are folks that aren't always in the room together talking about this. And what we did was we wrestled through this process over 2 days to develop some foundations for this institute that is going to be piloted at the University of Virginia either in the spring or the winter of this year. Well, the winter would be next year. And with the University of Virginia, potentially Morehouse College, and then a number of brother and sister schools in the greater Charlottesville area. And they're going to send these multidisciplinary teams to this institute to be trained up by a skilled and expert faculty. So we talked about, at this meeting, foundations for success. And these may seem simple, but they're really hard to do. Some of the foundations for a successful institute about creating a comprehensive response, we need collaboration and coordination. And those 2 things are different. They're not always the same. They don't always go together, but we need them. And I have a colleague, Lana Davis, who likes to say, in this work, we need everybody at the table. We need the collaborators, we need the coordinators, but we also need the folks that are angry and are not going to say please and thank you. That's going to help push this work forward as well. We need to create a learning community. So it's not just about the programs, but it's about how do schools learn together, create programs, adapt programs to create a positive and comprehensive response. We need real leadership and development. We need leaders standing up at all levels of the university to say, this is an issue, we're paying attention, we're doing something, and here's what we're doing. And we need, again, to go back to effective and promising programs and practices. What's the evidence base say? What do we know from our experience? What are we hearing from the community? It may seem simple, again, but it's hard to do well. We also talked about the fundamentals, about what schools need to know. Schools need to have a shared definition of intimate partner violence and sexual violence. And again, those 2 often overlap. It's not like we have the bucket with intimate partner violence and the bucket with sexual violence. So often they're together. We need to have common definitions and a common understanding to address the issue. We need to talk about school climate and school culture in open and honest ways. We need to lead with prevention. And prevention doesn't start the second somebody gets onto campus. The prevention should be happening before they get to campus. For school leaders, we think it should be in the materials that you send home, in the materials that parents receive, and in what's on your website for prospective students when they're looking at your school. We have so many students that will tell us, do you know how many clicks it takes to actually get to the sexual assault, sexual violence policies on our webpage? It's like archaeology trying to dig through to actually find where it is. We need to put this information front and center so that people can see it and put our commitment to prevention front and center. And that is echoing what both Emma and Lauren said. Prevention needs to be there, and the work begins before they actually get on campus. But one thing I would say, and one of our biggest takeaways from this 2-day convening, this experts convening at the University of Virginia to develop this institute, we heard from so many people, is that we need to create a framework of care at our schools. That has to be the come-from place that we do this work. That whether it be the prevention or the website or the prevention activities or the online learning modules that are presented or the response or the adjudication or the sanctions, it has to come from a framework of care. And that means that we need to not just follow the letter of the law, as a friend, Diane Rosenfeld at the Harvard School of Law likes to say, but also the spirit of the law. Because how we go about this work is equally as important, if not more important, as what we actually do. So we need to think outside the box. We need to be bold. We need new collaboration. We need new ideas. We need people not to be afraid to put ideas on the table to say, how do we create a new system for reporting? I mean, it was survivors that came up with Callisto to say, hey, underreporting is a huge issue. What are the barriers? We're going to create something new. And there's an opportunity there to shine the light, to have a better understanding of what's going on in our campus, because we can't hide from it anymore, right? We need to be bold, think outside the box, take challenges, and create new collaborations. And I want to call out another colleague I have in the room, Carrie Simon. We were having dinner last night, and we've both been doing this work for a long time now, right? And we were both so excited about this meeting, right? And what she was saying was, change is happening. This is happening. Colleges and universities are going to be different because of the work that people in this room are doing, that folks who aren't in this room but are national are doing, and that students are doing across the campus. And as someone who's working in the broader field of gender-based violence, that is so rare to see movement like this so quickly, so that my colleague, Lana Davis, says her daughter's going to college in a year, and she says, I can't believe that colleges and universities are going to look so different than they did a couple years ago around this issue when my daughter goes to college. So we need to appreciate that and appreciate this moment because it is so rare. And if we're bold, and if we keep it up, and if we keep the pressure on, we're going to continue to make positive changes. But the work is hard. The work is very hard. But if done well, what we're going to do is move from institutional betrayal to institutional courage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Casey, for that wonderful information about what's going on around the country. So we're heading out now to breakout sessions. Please check your program to look at the 3 breakout sessions that we have. If you've got any questions, grab one of the people with the green tags to check where you want to head to which one of those 3. And then at noon, we'll be...